Hi. Welcome to the lecture on Chapter 10, Project Communications Management. So this chapter, we're going to understand the importance of good communication on projects. A little bit about, not so much the technical skills, but now it's more soft skills that IT managers that need. We'll kind of review some of the concepts, elements of that, how to plan the project communications, how to create that management plan, how to manage communications, different types of technologies and media. We'll talk about methods of controlling communication a little bit, and there's some various ways of improving communication, how to run an effective meeting using different technologies. Having managed projects both locally and worldwide, this is key. I mean, I can have all the requirements. I can have the best way of tracking plans and assigning resources. But if I don't communicate well with other people, with what my expectations were, deliveries, working together with teammates, projects can get really out of hand really fast. That's what we're going to try to talk about today. So why is it important? Well, I definitely think the greatest threat is failure to communicate. Whether it's slide down this time, whether it's with take me out a lot together. Whether it's communication with your boss, your peers, customers. If you can't understand good communication, it could destroy you in a heartbeat. Definitely, our culture. When you look at some of the TV shows and cartoons out there, IT people are great as far as leading. Just kind of say, lock them in a closet, throw food under the door. They'll come out every now and then and go through. But to be successful, you got to be able to communicate. Research shows that you got to be able to communicate, otherwise forget it. And it's both not only just strong verbal, but it's also written communication. So yes, your communication classes that we ask you to take and your English classes that we have you taken part of the degree, all support this kind of skill set that you're going to need to be successful in the IT department world. There's definitely been some studies out as far as some of the most important skills. And as you can see, problem solving's probably number one on most lists, but close behind you got teamwork, listening. I can have minimal technical skills, but I'm very good at some of the solid soft skills and business skills. Some companies will say, I can teach you the technical stuff. I can teach you what the company does, but I can't teach you how to communicate to people, how to empathize with people, how to relate to people and our business and our customers. But I can teach you what our business does. I can teach you how to build a widget. I can teach you the steps, the processes, who the key people are, what the normal time frame is. Those are technical stuff I can teach you. But if you can't talk to anybody, you can't communicate, you may not have a career very long. So what are some of the processes we use? As we've gone through all the things, you got the management side of it, which is the overarching needs of information, communications that the stakeholders need. Managing communication. How do I create, distribute, store? How do I maintain all the communication that went on for this project? And then, of course, controlling it. How do I monitor our communication to make sure that it's meeting what the stakeholders need and what the project team needs? So just where all of these processes fall into place. Granted, the management is start to finish. You're doing everything. During the execution stage, I'm managing expectation, project document updates, project management plans, organizational plans. In controlling it starts a little bit later in the project, but not that much later as far as the project starts. It's worrying about performance appraisals, change requests, project document updates. All of these things come into play. Pretty much you're communicating from day one on your project. Now, what are some of the keys to good communication? Well, I spend probably, it says 90%. It's probably more than 90% time communicating. Yeah, I may spend a lot of time in Microsoft Project, making sure the timeline's spent. But once that's done, I'm talking to people all day long, whether it's vendors, developers, customers, my internal key stakeholders, bosses, subordinates, all of those are coming in. You're spending most of your time doing that. So you need to make sure you understand group and individual communication, both formally and informal. So there are times when you're meeting with the customers or a kickoff meeting where you got the sales team, the customer, key people on the project. It's going to be very formal, very locked down. We're going to follow things through, following a certain procedure. Or it's going to be very informal. Hey, I'm by the water cooler. How you doing today? Hey, how about project XYZ? How's it doing? Those you're going to do both. You got to do both very well. Now, distributing information, I just got to make sure it's in a timely fashion. It's got to be the right information at the right time. And sometimes, as we know, things happen at a project I got to make sure I can manage. And guess what? I got to make sure that how do I set up? How do I set the stage to deliver bad news? How am I going to tell my boss I'm going to miss the budget or miss the schedule? On projects I've done that well, you get very successful. Projects I did that bad, I got fired. So it does vary as to what's going on. Now, how do I understand group and individual communication needs? We all know people are not interchangeable. There's been a book on Mythical Man Month that you can't assume that a task can be broken down into 2 months and get 2 people to work on it 1 month. It just doesn't work. And it's like, 9 women can't produce a baby in 1 month. But people used to think, well, I just throw more bodies at it, more people at it to get a project done on time. Doesn't happen. It just escalates the problems exponentially. Now, face-to-face meeting. I mean, in this day of email, Facebook, Twitter, it's easy. You can get on a conference call. You can get on a FaceTime to be able to have this interaction. But I always found that I had to sit in front of my team. When I had 27 teams scattered across the United States, I rotated through all 27 cities on a regular basis so they could see me and do face-to-face, because most of the communication is body language. This slide says 58%. I've seen stuff as much as a whole lot higher than that. So body language is key in communication, and you can't do that in a lot of cases. Even with a video, you can't see a lot of that. So I think it's very important to make sure you can do face-to-face communication. Now, personal preferences, the different skills, as you took personality tests last week, and now you look at each of the different types of personalities have different communication styles. So just be aware that when you're dealing with different types of personalities, your communication may have to change. So just keep that in mind as you're going through this. You want to make sure that you set up a plan of interactions that encourage more face-to-face, whether they're shorter meetings, because the last thing I want to do is do a 3-hour meeting and I talk to each person 2 minutes during the meeting, but I'm tying everybody up for 3 hours. I usually like the stand-up meetings. We went in a room that had no chairs. Meeting was 5 minutes, start to finish. Just boom, hit the key points, got everybody off and running, and that's it. So it's a great tool. So you've seen some company that have meetings while walking, get out, move, So I think it also helps you know your material better mentally than it is, well, here's my PowerPoint slides and here's all the documents, reports. I got to make sure I can communicate that over there. There are some companies that says, hey, I'm not going to allow email between certain times. I'm not even going to have meetings during the, maybe there's meetingless Mondays or meetingless Wednesdays, or schedule all their meetings on one day. So I can have 4 days of work and only 1 day of actual meetings, which then forces you to think differently about how you communicate. Now, there's definitely examples of how things got wrong. I'm not going to go through this whole thing, but just know that miscommunication is huge. I mean, you played the telephone game when you were kids. How often did that what message went into the chain came out that way? So just know that things can go wrong very quickly. Now, distributing information effectively and timely. You can't bury crucial information. You got to make sure it's right on top, up front, so people know. You can't be afraid as a project manager to be afraid to report bad information. You can't even be afraid as a developer to report bad information to the project manager, because it's going to come back and bite you sometime. So just don't be afraid to do it. Don't bury critical information. And sometimes oral communication helps bring out important information, both good and bad, into the open, and it's just a possibility. Now, there are definitely other communication considerations. Rarely does the person interpret the message the way you intended it. So you got to make sure that you're very explicit as to what you're trying to get. Pay attention to geographic and cultural background differences, different time zones, different work hours, different language barriers, different culture norms, how to communicate. So if you're dealing with an international customer, the people in Italy are different time frames in here, but just take that in consideration. Now, bad news. Gee, guess what? I mean, is this a good message or not? Yes, I'm pregnant. No, I'm pregnant. No, we're not getting married. Blah blah blah. But you just know that there are a lot of ways you can tell somebody something negatively, but you want to make sure that you do it in the right way. Now, communication channels. Now, granted, the more people it's great to have one-on-one conversations, but just keep in mind that the number of conversations you have to have, if you're relaying the same message X number of times, the number of times you have to say that message definitely follows a formula similar to this as far as the number of communication, the number of people involved. So just pay attention to choosing how you communicate. If you're giving that same message to a number of people, you may want to have a meeting. You may want to put it in a memo, versus having one-on-one communication. Just a rough idea as to how many conversations it takes, 4 people, 6 communication channels, just because I want to make sure everybody's talking to everybody. So it does make things interesting. Now, project communication plan, you need to make sure you have a plan. Document how this project is going to communicate with each other, based either on the needs of the project, the type of, need a written plan is saying, hey, based on this project, this is how we're going to communicate. We're going to do Wednesday at 9 o'clock meetings, half hour, boom, 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 this is what you need. So know that different communication plans vary based on the type of project. Larger ones need more specifics on how the plans. Smaller projects can be, more individual. But you're going to want to make sure your documents are all on the same page. Now, what kind of things can this management plan contain? Well, it's got to make sure you understand the requirements of the stakeholders. What type of information is going to be communicated, and how is it going to be communicated? What level of detail? Who's going to receive it? Who's going to produce it? Methods, technology is it going to be text? Is it going to be, everything else that you need to make sure? How often is going to be done? What happens if problems occur? What's going to be the escalation plan? So all this plan, you need to make sure you understand everything how this project is going to communicate from start to finish thinking about anything that could happen. And so just to give you a sample of this analysis, what each person wants, whether it's an email, a text, an internet, hard copy, who gets it, who's going to do it, when's it going to be done. So you just want to make sure everybody understands. And then once you've documented this, get it signed off and approved, you file it away, and this is what you use to keep track of all the project's communications. Now, managing the communications is definitely the larger part of the project manager's job. Yeah, you think that the Microsoft project is hard and stuff, but this is definitely the lion's share of what you do. Making sure that getting the right information to the right people at the right time, making sure the right format, what technology, what media to use, it becomes interesting. Now, technology has enhanced creation distribution. It used to be the only way you could do it was typewriter and paper copies and overhead slides and to communicate, and everybody had to show up at, get in, travel, because you just didn't want to put this technical, maybe even proprietary information out, outside of your possession. So everybody came to you, or you called a big meeting in, of course, a nice hotel, blah, blah, blah. But now you've got a chance to email, text, video, a lot of different ways to create it and distribute it. Now, global disasters definitely become issues, but one of the things they work around the clock to do after you get the tsunamis and stuff like that, restore communications. That's one of the first things people want to do is find a way to communicate. Because we need to make sure we can relay information, how good or bad things are, whether it's a disaster or whether it's a project. Now, there's definitely different types of classifications. There's interactive, where people can exchange email, conversation, information at the same time. Push communication, where you say, hey, I'm sending you information, reports and stuff, or I can pull information. I want to gather information from you, make a request, and then have you supply information to me. So there's different types. And this is a media choice table. Just says, hey, I want to make sure that when you're thinking about how you're going to be communicating with someone, I got to make sure that, okay, which of these types of communications are good, bad, or indifferent in communicating for this project. So when you're looking at the different types of things that could happen on a project, you want to make sure is, okay, is it going to be a face-to-face meeting is most important? Can I just post something on the website? Or is it got to have a paper copy and email to somebody? So you just got to make sure you've just decide under which types of communication, which media you're going to use, and is it appropriate or not? Because the what went wrong section, definitely collaboration can be a pain. That of all the communication technology, 3 or more commonly present high-performing companies, they're using web conferences, audio conferencing, meeting scheduling technologies. Make sure you're all sharing the same calendar. I mean, without that, people may not know what they're showing up to. Just got to keep in mind, communicate regions around the country. So the more you spend time in some of this stuff as far as new tools, things can get better. Now, how to report how the project is doing. Now, most of the things you're going to get is you're going to be, status report. Where does it stand, both on the budget and on the activity itself? Progress reports describe what the project team has accomplished during a certain time period. And of course, every project manager goes, well, okay, you give me the information. What's the impact? What's it going to do? What's the forecast for future project? Are we still on target? Are we still trending in the right direction? So all of those come into play. Now, controlling communications, I got to make sure I get the optimal flow of information throughout the project. The project manager and the team have to use the different systems, expert judgment, meetings to assess if communication is working. And of course, if a problem exists, what's the project manager do? I've got to fix it. I got to find a solution to make sure that communication continues to flow in an optimal fashion. Just got to make sure you know who you're talking to and is it working. So it's no different than any other activity in the project. If your development is falling behind, you put in plans to try to put it back on track. The same thing with communication. If it falls behind, or it isn't working, people don't feel like they're informed, go through. Now, how do I improve communication? Well, personally, you can develop better communication skills. You can learn how to run effective meetings. You can use email technologies better, or you can say, hey, I want to learn from the best and use other companies' templates for communication. So how do I develop better communication skills? Well, we spend a lot of time training employees, but individuals, you can volunteer classes, that you're making sure you sign up for a communications class. Toastmasters is a great organization to help you if you're having trouble talking in front of people, can help. So just make sure that there are skills out there, there's classes out there to help you better understand how you communicate, whether it's writing, whether it's, speaking. But you got to make sure that, if you're doing international business, you got to make sure you understand different cultures, different countries, how, not just timing, but how do they like to link? Because you may say I may say something orally during a presentation. The Americans will take it one way. Another country may take it totally different. So you got to understand different cultures, different languages. And to get better at communication, you got to step up and be a leader. You got to decide you're going to improve, because the better you do this, the better project manager, the better developer you're going to be. Snapshot as far as how many recruiters. I mean, guess what? You're posting things on social media. Guess what? Recruiters are checking out your profiles. So you have to be careful what you put out there. You make a blunder, guess what? It could cost you a job or something worse. So keeping what you share stays there, and recruiters do look. How do I run an effective meeting? One, do I have to have the meeting? The worst thing I hated was somebody calls a meeting and it didn't need to be done. It could be done in an email, a phone call. But once you've decided a meeting's got to take place, you got to make sure that it's got a purpose. And you know what you expect to come out of it. You want to begin with the end in mind. So I'm planning this meeting. I expect the following output. That means if I'm looking for that output, who should attend? If I need decisions made, I got to make sure the key stakeholders that can make those decisions are at the meeting. I can't just come to the meeting and say, well, I'm expecting this decision. And we say, well, I'll take it back to my boss. No. If you need a decision made, make sure the boss is invited to the meeting, make sure he can attend. Make sure there's an agenda so people can understand what they're going to do, when they're going to do it, especially if they have status to update. They got to come prepared. Make sure that there's handouts, visual aids, because people like visual activities. Of course, you want to make sure you run the meeting professionally. Make sure there's ground rules so that this meeting is a brainstorming session, so it'll be a free-for-all. It is a fact-finding, so I'm going to gather information from you, so come prepared with the information. But it's also a good way to build relationships with other team players. Now, using technology, we all like it. We use it a lot, but make sure that you're using the appropriate tool to communicate what you want. Sending a text message may not be appropriate, but you just need to make sure. I want to make sure, and I also want to make sure the right people get the message. Make sure that if you're using an email or something, make sure that the title of that email can give somebody an indicator as to what the contents are. Or I would usually say in there, I'd say action or FYI, so that people knew that, oh, this is an FYI. I can decide I can read it later. But if it had me action or urgent, I told them, hey, that triggered, I need an answer, reply relatively quickly. So it's a way of using the subject lines to help manage the communication. Now, some collaborative tools are out there. SharePoint, Google Docs, wikis, Kanban boards are all possibilities for collaborative tools. Just an example there. There's some templates out there. Some people say, well, I'm afraid to ask for help. I just need an example. There are plenty of them out there. So just know that you need to have good communication. Here's an example of project description, template for different progress reports, template for action item deliverables, lesson learned report. You want to make sure near the end of a project, I can say, hey, did somebody learn something on this project? What did we learn? What did we do right? What did we do wrong? And we'll get more into that later. But knowing that one of the outputs is lessons learned, we need to make sure that we've got that. Plus, all this communication's got to be stored away. It's got to be archived. So you got to prepare in your plan to make sure, okay, what am I going to do with this information? How long am I going to keep it? So those are things you need to keep in mind. Some projects set up websites. I guess I've never had the luxury of having that option, but large enough organizations, enough customers, key stakeholders in different places, a website is a strong possibility. Of course, here you're using the tool Basecamp, showing how they communicate across different types of media. So using software, they can aid it. I mean, I don't want to, it's, since most people work telecommute or part-time at home, I got to make sure I can use that virtual communication. I got to make sure that stuff's in play. So hopefully this gives you a rough idea as far as communication, both individually, team-wise, online, in-person meetings, the types of documentation required, all come into play as far as a project manager and being a developer as far as a project team. So hopefully that helped. And if you have any questions, give me a call.